Thank you so much, Professor Chomsky. It's a pleasure to finally sit down with you. I don't know if you know that took me almost more than a month.
It's not a long time.
Yeah, I know that you are too busy, and I really appreciate your time. And I just talked to Mr. Dabashi, Hamid, and he said, yeah, hi to you, and I know that he was a big help for me. And we are approaching the 30 years or 31 years of the Iranian Revolution in university. And you are known among Iranian intellectuals as a major public intellectual of our time and a critic of the US foreign policy. If I ask you to evaluate US foreign policy towards Iran in terms of helping or hurting an overall democratic movement that, regardless of its ups and downs, has been growing in Iran over the past 2 decades, what would be your response?
I mean, U.S. policy is not oriented towards trying to help or hurt the democracy movement. It's not a consideration. So whatever consequences there have been indirect, unintended, indirect consequences. My general feeling is that, of course, the U.S. rhetorically supports the democracy movement, but that doesn't mean anything. The U.S. always supports democracy, or claims to, in enemy states, not in its own domains. In fact, that's been well established by scholarship, which has shown, in fact, convincingly that the U.S. supports democracy if and only if it corresponds to strategic and economic interests. That's very well-established observation, in fact, by conservative analysts, neo-Reaganites, in fact. They don't like it, but that's what it is. As far as Iran is concerned, the U.S. would support democracy if it perceives it as helpful to U.S. interests. Now, what have the effects been of U.S. policy to the democracy movement? In general, I think it's difficult to evaluate, but in fact, the democracy movement is a better place to evaluate it than I am. But I think that in general, it's probably been harmful. I mean, the U.S. Hostility towards Iran, which has nothing to do with its human rights record, that's obvious. Awful as Iran's human rights record is, Saudi Arabia's is worse. Saudi Arabia is a very approved ally. Or take, say, Egypt. Mubarak is a really brutal dictator. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, when international activists were trying to bring aid into Gaza, and they found themselves in Egypt. The Egyptian security forces were brutally beating them, in ways that, if it had happened in Iran, would have been headlines, but wasn't even probably not even mentioned. When Obama went to Egypt to deliver his famous Cairo address, he was asked, not much, but occasionally by the press, what he was going to say about the Mubarak dictatorship and about its authoritarian tendencies, which is kind of an understatement. And his answer was, I don't like to call folks names, so I'm not going to say that he's authoritarian. Now, he does good, and he's helpful to the United States. Well, after that, if not before, no one can take seriously the talk about concern for human rights. So yes, the U.S. will rhetorically object to human rights violations in Iran because it's opposed to the Iranian government. Now, how has the hostile stance towards Iran affected the democracy movement? As I said, I think a fair estimate is it's probably harmed it. The hostile attitude strengthens the harsher elements in the Iranian government. So, for example, in 2003, when there was a sort of a reformist government, it made proposals to the United States to deal with all outstanding issues, nuclear issues, Israel-Palestine, and others. The response, if the United States had responded positively to that, it might have made some progress, both in settling issues that are under conflict and also to improving the prospects for the democracy movement. That could have meant progress for Iran and opening it to the outside world, which the democracy movement could have used to extend its power. However, the U.S. reaction was quite different. The Bush administration then not only rejected the offer, but censured the Swiss delegate who brought the offer to the United States for daring to bring the offer. Okay, that just tells the hardliners on Iran, we better crack down. And I presume it also instructs the Iranian people, we better support them, because look at this hostile power. In fact, not long after that, Ahmadinejad was elected, and the moderately reformist period was ended. And I think that continues. It takes the question of whether Iran has the right to enrich uranium. The U.S. claims it doesn't. That's a major issue of contention. Most of the world sides with Iran. The non-aligned countries, which is most of the world, have repeatedly and vigorously supported Iran's right as a signer of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Actually, some of the recent polls, even the majority of Americans agree with that. But, and I presume that it appears to be the case that that's very strongly supported within Iran, pretty much across the spectrum. So the U.S. rejection of it increases tensions and increases the capacity of hardline elements to crush opposition, saying we have to join together to defend ourselves from this attack. And furthermore, again, as in the case of Egypt and Saudi Arabia, it's pretty hard to take the U.S. and Obama seriously on this. After all, there are 3 countries that have never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty: Israel, India, and Pakistan. They all have nuclear weapons, and the U.S. has aided their nuclear weapons program in each case. Israel, we don't have to talk about, but in the case of Pakistan, yes, the Reagan administration pretended that it didn't know that Pakistan was developing nuclear weapons.
And Bush signed the agreement.
Well, with Bush, it went beyond. He signed a treaty with India that effectively authorized India to proceed with the development of nuclear weapons with U.S. assistance. The treaty didn't specifically have to do with nuclear weapons, but it had to do with nuclear technology, which frees up India to extend its nuclear weapons programs. And all of this was pretty dramatic. Just last October, there was a Security Council resolution calling on all states to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, deal with all their issues within it, called on Iran to follow Security Council demands and so on. And it was widely interpreted as a victory for Obama against in his conflict with Iran. But that's not, that could only be, that propaganda triumph could only be achieved by totally suppressing crucial facts. So right at the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency passed a resolution calling on Israel to open up its facilities to international inspection and to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The United States tried to block the resolution. Europe tried to block it, but it was passed anyway. I don't think it was even reported in the United States.
No.
And I checked. The only report I could find was in Mexico, in fact. Although it was all over the wire services, so every editorial desk knew it. And furthermore, right after that, Obama went out of his way to assure Israel privately that they were not going to be subject to this demand.